Hi, I'm Samantha Baldwin. Some of you may remember me. I was in the news last year for the alleged abduction of my sons. It's now 18 months on and I've barely seen them. In fact, I haven't seen them all of this year. It's barbaric what this system are doing to my sons. They desperately want to see their mummy. Obviously, I'm desperate to see them, and I can't begin to imagine to describe my reality, let alone theirs. Theirs is horrific. But what they're doing to us, what the system have done to me and my family, is absolutely abhorrent. We're normal, law-abiding, we're nice, good people. We're just normal people. Nothing special, but we're just caring, good people. And if it's happened to me, this could happen to anyone. The boys are now living with the man they say abused them, their father, and I don't have a clue where they are in the country. I haven't a clue. So going back to when all this happened, it started in December 2014. We just bought a new house. We've moved from Stretford in South Manchester, and we moved over to a little village just north of Rochdale called Littleborough, and we'd bought our own house and begun to settle there. It was near to the rest of my family who live in the Rochdale area, and we just begun to settle down. And then my eldest, who was 7 years old at the time, started to disclose abuse from his father. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was just a horrific time, but I never doubted in my mind that my little boy was telling the absolute truth. Everything kind of began to make sense. All the behaviours from him and his brother, who also disclosed, who was 3 at the time. Everything kind of made sense. They never wanted to go with him. They'd scream at times for going with them. I noticed was less so towards as he got older, becoming more compliant, but would show some very disturbing signs. Would cry for no reason. His performance at school was very, very poor, so much so that I had to take him out of school and homeschool him, and that was not in my plan of things to do, but I felt I had no choice but to do that. It was a very good school in Stretford that Lee went to. It was excellent in Ofsted, and the head teacher said, and I quote, "We don't know what to do with." The little one was very angry. He just had this anger, and I just never knew where it had come from. And the eldest one would be helpless and just an absolute mess. I just thought, what's this about? I just never understood it. I tried everything. I looked at everything apart from what was right in front of me, basically, which was the father. So basically, the disclosures got worse and worse, and my youngest started to disclose as well. They mentioned it now wasn't just their father, it was their grandfather, it was the grandmother, various friends of their father. They mentioned a gay couple. These are a gay couple, as I said. I'm nothing against gay people. I'm just describing them to you. They live in Chorlton. They're both very tall, intelligent, articulate, charming men, as is their father. Very charming, very likeable. This is the exterior that he puts on to the outside world, and he fooled me, I have to say. And so the disclosures got worse and worse. It was just horrific. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We went to the police after about a week after his first disclosure, and was subsequently interviewed. At this point, he'd only mentioned about his father, and it was enough to get the father arrested that night. And the policeman who interviewed was called DC Christopher. I now know is a DS, a sergeant, but he was the officer who dealt with our case initially. He went to arrest him. He had him arrested, and then he interviewed him back at the Rochdale police station. And then he came round to my mother's house to speak to us, to give us some feedback, and he was obviously completely taken in. He described him as an impeccable character, somebody who would hold up well in court. He described his house as immaculate. and he said he didn't look like a paedophile. He said, I know a paedophile and he isn't one. I asked him if he fancied children, and he said no. And anyway, this kind of thing goes on when parents separate. So he compared me to his ex-wife as well. He made some very inappropriate comments, and at that point I just knew I couldn't work with this man. So we made a complaint to the detective inspector, Caroline, and she said she'd get somebody else onto the case, and nothing was done. Basically, the boys were continuing to disclose. At this stage, he had now disclosed rape, and he started to disclose about more people. My youngest son described some very, very dark things that were done, that we now know to be satanic ritual abuse, something I'd never even heard of, let alone, we looked into it, and it was satanic ritual abuse, without a doubt. And no, we're not crazy, and we're not delusional. This stuff really happens, and it's happening all around the world. Why would you get children saying the same thing in different countries, saying the same things to corroborate each other? They don't make this stuff up. Normal children who are brought up well, sheltered from horror films, that kind of thing, they wouldn't have this information to access. They would have either have had to have witnessed it or seen it happening to somebody else. So there was never any doubt in my mind that this had happened. And just to give you an example of some of the things the boys were disclosing, he would say, Daddy would say to him, if you ever tell anyone, you'll never see Mummy again. And look what's happened. He's right for the moment. So, yeah, for the boys, that's their reality now, that Mummy is gone. If you tell anyone, Mummy will go away, which I well and truly have for the boys. His family would say that. Grandma, lovely church-going woman to the outside world, she used to threaten my boys and say, if you ever tell anyone, you'll never see Mummy, you'll never see your family, you'll never see your pets. He said the little one said that Daddy held him under the water with his clothes on, and he killed him. So that's how it felt to him. I understand now that this is a practice well used in satanic ritual abuse to induce absolute terror. He described being injected by his father. We told the police at this stage, by the way, it got to the 31st of December. We're still not being passed another officer to deal with. And we also realised that the boys should have been offered sexual health checks, and they weren't, and all this time had gone by. So I went to the GP and I asked her if she would. I described the situation, described the disclosures. Baldwin had just disclosed over Christmas about Daddy weeing in his mouth, about making wee come out of his bottom. He tried to stop it, but it came out into his nappy. That was the disclosure of my then 3-year-old son. And he is not a liar also. They are telling the truth 100%. My children are not liars. So at this stage I wanted to get them checked out. We haven't been offered that at all. As I say, no police had come round. There was no replacement at this stage. So the GP then rang social services and the police, and later that evening we were then visited by a new police officer, DC Alyssa, along with somebody from social services. Luke wanted to speak to her alone, so my family and I, we went upstairs. He spoke to Alyssa, who we felt quite comfortable with, and he told her things that he hadn't even told us. He described abuse, he described individuals, he described injections, and so that was enough for her to get the 2 gay men arrested and the grandparents in Devon cautioned. A few days later, this new Alyssa had organised boys to have sexual health checks at the St Mary's Sark, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre in Manchester. He refused to have his check. He wouldn't take his trousers off. He had his check. They could see from looking at him that he had once had a disease called molluscum contagiosum on his bottom and anus. I understand that children can get this disease from each other, but that would normally happen on the trunk of the body, not on the anus and the buttocks. The GP, the area that we just moved to, said if somebody had taken their child in and they had it in the areas that Lou did when he was 5, she would say it can be as a result of sexual abuse. Unfortunately, my GP at the time in Manchester, in Stretford, it didn't give me that information, so I didn't have a clue. During their sexual health checks, I asked the doctor there to take off hair samples for the boys, which she did. So it was understood that the hair would then be analysed forensically for sedatives. I had described at this point several times that he'd been injected by Daddy. So the hair was sent in. Around this time, or in the weeks to follow, the disclosures began to tail off a bit. We had his second ABE interview, which he described all the way through about injections, about Daddy giving him injections and that it felt like a mosquito bite. The needle was very, 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 very fine, and it would be in his bottom. And he even slumped down on the sofa to demonstrate the effect that this had on him. And around this time, he had his interview, which was known as a play interview. All the way through, he distracted. He didn't want to talk about it, but the one thing he did say was, "Daddy, weed in my mouth, and he's a bad guy." So, there you go. Make of that as you will. Obviously, he could have weed in his mouth, or it could be something else. So at this point, we then, my mother then spoke to the head of the department, Detective Inspector Caroline, and she described about the injections, and she also told that, now described, there was more men involved. We didn't have any names for these men at this stage, and she called my mum a fantasist. This is on the phone. She's never met my son, she's never viewed their ABE interview, she's never met me, let alone spoke to me on the phone, but she called my mum a fantasist and said, "Injections, 10 men, that's fantasist." We were just left completely just horrified by this. In the weeks to follow, the police were refusing to test the boy's hair, even though we had made some very, very clear disclosures to me and to the police. And at this stage, I hadn't even seen his ABE interview. I didn't realise just how much he'd said on there and how much detail he'd given, like the mosquito bite and the fineness of the needle. The April 2015 came, and we started to disclose again. And he mentioned yet more people were involved. Dave was in a band called Lou named several people within that band, not all of them, but several people within that band. They are satanic abusers. I won't describe what he told me, but it is horrific. It was sexual, emotional, mental and physical abuse of the worst kind. It was just, two of the abusers lived in our village, Littleborough, so even though we just bought our own house, I felt I had no choice but to stay in that area again, so my family and I relocated to Nottinghamshire. That was in summer of 2015. Shortly after that, Greater Manchester Police, Rochdale Police contacted me to say that the bail conditions had now been lifted and no further investigations were going to be made. They sent it off to the CPS, but I now understand that that was just to protect the father. From the start, they completely had it in for us. They were not going to believe us. They called us fantasists, and they sided with the paedophile satanic abuser. So we thought we were safe. We're in a different area. Several weeks later, I then had a letter through the post. Unfortunately, they tracked me down because I was receiving child tax credits, and they tracked me down that way, unfortunately. And the papers that I received in the post said that I had emotional harm to the children. So it started off a lengthy, horrific family court process. In the meantime, the boys were doing so well. They were just emerging into the children they were always meant to be. He was starting to read, which was amazing from a child who just couldn't do anything at school. He was learning to read. We'd joined the homeschooling community, and he was making friends. He was doing really well. The boys were happier. They were smiling more, laughing more. Baldwin had started a local school, and he was doing so well. They were just doing amazingly. They were blossoming. And then the court case continued. In that time, at the beginning of 2016, we contacted the IICSA, Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse, and through that the investigation was reopened of sorts with Greater Manchester Police by a DCI. Through that, the one thing that was done that wasn't done in the original investigation was that the hair that they still had in the forensics department in Greater Manchester Police in Rochdale was now tested. The hair had been sat there, it had been taken in January 2015 and it had been sat there up until May 2016 when they decided to test it over a year later. So what I didn't understand was at the time whatever's in the hair is then frozen in time, because obviously it doesn't grow, it's cut, and then it's just there. It doesn't fade away. The drugs, if there are any, will still be contained. So we got the results in July, and lo and behold, it was found to contain various sedatives, benzodiazepines, nordiazepam, and temazepam, and also zolpidem as well. Now, I don't know if you know anything about sedatives, but benzodiazepines include things like Valium. And zolpidem is a completely different classification of drug, and it's apparently used in date rape, and it's one of the drugs of choice for date rape because it goes through the system very, very quickly and can't be detected in the blood, like in a matter of hours after. So this was found in my son's hair. His hair was 7 centimetres long. His hair was 5.5 centimetres long, and there was drugs in different sections. They tested the first section, which was 0 to 2. I might be slightly wrong with this. The second section, 2 to 4, and then the last section. So in effect, it's like a calendar, and the hair grows at an average rate of 1 centimetre a month. So his hair contained drugs right to the end of the tips, as did Louis. And so, you know, it was horrifying to receive the results and think what the boys had been through. But at the same time, it was like, well, my goodness, we've got some evidence that finally, I know I was assured that would mean, you know, would bring success in the family court case, like i.e. having findings made against him that he had sexually abused the children and drugged them, and what they were saying is true. So that was around getting towards the end of summer 2016 when we had all of those drug results, brought them into court. We were all then sent off to have our hair tested. Me, my mum, my sons, Dave. Of course, all came back negative because the boys hadn't seen their father for 2 years at this point. And obviously, you know, none of us had taken any of those drugs ever. I've never taken any prescription drugs ever. And none of us had taken those drugs. And because the police were saying, oh, well, they could have got it off worktop, surface contamination. It just didn't make sense. Well, I've been looking after the children, and when they've not been in my care, they've been with their father. They say the father's injected at them, and lo and behold, they've got drugs in their hair. So, anyway, so this family court case concluded in March, and I'd gone in there, and I'd sat 10 minutes into the judgment, or around just over 10 minutes into the judgment, and I could see it wasn't going my way. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Although at this point I didn't hear that I'd been accused of drugging my children and or my mother. So I left with them. I left, and I met the boys at the lodge where we were later found 10 days later. But it was horrifying. I found out in the meantime that, you know, the findings had been made that the abuse hadn't happened, even though we believe it. So work that one out from a normal, sane person. And by the way, I have had psychological assessments and psychiatric assessments, all of which show that I haven't got any mental health problems. Although you get called delusional for not agreeing with the judge's findings, that equals delusional apparently. So there must be many delusional people around. And So here we are today in this horrific situation. It's just absolutely staggering. You just can't believe this stuff happens. I didn't know anything about family courts. I knew that they used a different what's it called, burden of proof than in criminal proceedings, which is beyond all reasonable doubt. In family court, they use a balance of probabilities. So they make findings saying that probably happened and that probably didn't happen. So it's open to so much abuse. So the judge obviously didn't have any evidence that me and or my mother had done it. But his theory was that in December, it's going back to December 2014, after becoming dissatisfied with the police investigation, we then took it upon ourselves to order some drugs off the internet, give them to the boys, a one-off dose, to corroborate the abuse disclosures. Not only does this make ludicrous sense, but it's also scientifically impossible because of the lengths of the hair. So how did the drugs get to the end of the hair? For example, in hair, if that's 7 centimetres long, how do you get from there to there in a month? It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we know the boys weren't given drugs in December because they were with us safe, and I'd stopped them from seeing their father as soon as they disclosed. I asked a drugs company some questions as part of my appeal process, which, surprise, surprise, was refused. I didn't even get to appeal stage. They refused me right to appeal. And the drugs company, I asked them some questions that were objective, and I gave them the options. Could this have happened as a result of a one-off dose in December, or what is the likelihood that it happened over a period of several months prior to that? And they answered it was much more likely to have happened over a period of several months as opposed to a one-off dose in December. So I'll let you work out the rest, but I know my children are telling the truth. They are not liars. I am not a liar. My family are not liars. My children are now in danger. If you know anything, please come forward. Thank you.